Hey there friends, Dave Paulides, CanAm Missing Project, copyrighted edition for our video channel. And this is a missing person segment. Thank you for being here. And I appreciate all of you tuning in. Please watch the entire segment. It helps me immensely. At the end of it, if you like it, give me a thumbs up. But since this is missing people, we got some other paperwork to do before we get going, per se. I was doing a video the other day, and I sat in front of you and went, oh, that's good. And it was for a product called Hint. Pretty careful what I eat, drink. I do splurge occasionally. But Hint, let me say what it says on the side. Ingredients: purified water and natural flavors. And no artificial sweeteners. And no sugars. All right? Seems like a pretty good drink, right? Well, people like to make comments. And I got a couple comments right here on that video. Hey, you're a fool because that stuff can't contain some bad stuff and you got to do your homework and this and that. Yeah. Friends, villagers, do not, underline, do not believe everything you read online. And if you want to believe it, at least vet it to see if it's true. Just because somebody says something very strong and wrong doesn't mean it's true. Just because somebody takes somebody else to court doesn't mean it's true what they're alleging. Capiche? Now, if you want to call me out about something, do your homework before you do it, because I'll make a fool out of you if you're wrong, especially if you try to do it to me publicly. And here we go. So somebody said, Dave, you're a fool. You know, this thing contains something that's really bad for you. It contains propylene glycol, and you don't want that in your system, and, you know, pay attention. Okay. Some pretty strong allegations. And if you're going to make the strong allegations, you better have your bags packed and be ready to go. So, I read about it too. I didn't believe it. So what I did is I went straight to the company. I went to Hint. And I sent them an email. And guess what? They responded. From customer support, a woman named Brianna. Hi there. I would be happy to address this concern for you. Hint water contains fruit essences we make solely from plants. No sweeteners of any kind, no preservatives, and no propylene, glycol, or phosphorus content. Did you hear that? We recognize that there are lots of things on the internet about, well, everything. We unfortunately cannot control what is posted about Hint. Rest assured that every bottle of Hint contains the best ingredients available so that your family and ours can truly fall in love with water without sugar or diet sweeteners. To restate, Hint water does not contain propylene glycol. Let us know if there's anything else we can do to help. I hope you enjoy the rest of your week. Best regards, Brianna W. Ta-da! Now some of you may say, well, they're lying. Well, okay. When a company comes out and lies about a direct allegation like that, and it's found to be true later, and you sue them, they have punitive damages then awarded against them for flagrantly lying on a public spectrum about things like this. They wouldn't do it. They wouldn't do it because what's the point in even addressing it? Just ignore the email. Don't say anything, right? But they did. I admire that about Hint. So I don't care what anybody says. I mean, unless you've got the evidence and the goods on somebody, keep your comments to yourself. Don't try to abuse a company just because somebody else has said something online about it. Angie and I tend to do our homework about these things. Now, second bone of contention. Many months ago, I did 20 segments of videos, each a half an hour long, about Bigfoot. 20 classes, 30 minutes long each. And at the end, there's a test. You can take an online test. Thought it'd be fun. Made a little patch, and you guys could send in the test. With $10, you pass, you get the patch. And I said to send a self-addressed stamped envelope and a check or cashier's check for $10. Pretty simple. As with everything else in my world, it gets totally messed up. I told you before, I got a bunch of fraud checks on accounts that were not even open. That's how fraud they were. I mean, if you don't have the money in an account, I get that. But when the account's been closed for 6 months, that's fraud. There's a lot of screwball people out there. But here's another one. And here's the new rule. That Bigfoot test, I'm not going to honor it for anything outside the USA. So if you're in Canada, another country, just don't even send anything to me. Here's why. If you were going to take the Bigfoot test and you were in Canada, you might want to send me a check drawn on U.S. funds, number one. Number two, you can buy U.S. stamps in Canada online. Put it on an envelope, put it in your envelope to me, and then I could turn around and mail it back to you. That's not what anyone does. What they do is they put all the onus on me and our people. So what they did is they send me a check drawn on Canadian funds, and then they give me a $5 Canadian bill to pay for their postage. But people don't understand. When I get that check, I can't just deposit it. Our bank charge a fee for transition from Canadian funds to US funds. And there blows our whole margin. And this $5 bill, I can't even get it exchanged until I get $100 Canadian. So it's worthless to me. Now, I'm a good person. I said just honor it. Send them their patch, they pass the test, and write them a note saying how we got screwed. But, so no more Bigfoot tests from out of the country. We don't have the time to deal with it. I'm not going to build something into the system where we lose all the way around. It's just ridiculous. And I've lost too many times on this already with bad checks, thanks to some. So anyhow, the new rules. Now today, we're dealing with 2 missing people. The first case, it's out of Nova Scotia, Canada. You don't hear much about missing people out of Nova Scotia. This is the head scratcher. It involves a son of a man named Rudolph Mueller. And the son was 23 months old. Went missing August 17th, 1909 at about 5 p.m. The location was 2 miles northwest of Stellarton, Nova Scotia, in a little area called Mount William. Now, you guys watch the History Channel? You watch the Oak Island show with Marty Lagina and his family searching for treasure? That's where that is. Here's where Stellarton is. And the mountain, just 2 miles northwest. I gotta get to Nova Scotia one of these days. It's a pretty area. And a lot of things that are going on up there that I find intriguing that I'd like to tour. But anyhow, remember the last name Mueller. Mueller is German. sometimes. Well, this time, the articles actually said it was a family from Bulgaria. The husband was a coal miner. And on August 17th, the husband was working in the mines. Well, at 7 a.m., Mrs. Mueller leaves the house with their son and pushes the carriage 2 miles towards Mount William, where she's going to meet a friend to spend the day. Well, about an hour later, at 8 o'clock, she gets to her friend's house, Mrs. Corbett. They commiserate a short time, and then Mrs. Corbett, Miss Mueller, and the son go about 200, 300 yards from the home, and they start picking blueberries. Remember that. Berry picker. Important. So they pick blueberries to about 11 a.m. Then they come back to the Corbett's home, and they just relax. Talk. Clean up the baby. Hang around till about 3 or 4 o'clock. They have dinner. And then the baby falls asleep in the carriage. Everyone makes sure the baby's asleep. Both moms do. And they leave the carriage in the home. They close the front door so it latches. And they walk 200 yards out to the berry patch. So they're looking at the front door picking berries. They had direct visibility of the front door per their statement. So they pick berries for about an hour. And Mrs. Corbett realizes they didn't have a big enough bucket. So she goes back into the home to get the bucket. And as she's approaching the front door, she realizes the door is open just a bit. She opens the door, and there's a chair near the back of the door. She goes in further, and she realizes that the boy isn't in the carriage. Nobody else is in the home. Nobody else is around. She calls out the name. The boy doesn't answer. She calls out the name in the front yard, and Mrs. Mueller hears that and comes running. Miss Corbett explains that she can't find the boy, and they start searching the yard. And they're frantically searching the yard. Now, what's puzzling to Mrs. Corbett and Miss Mueller is earlier that day, when they were picking berries and the son was with them walking around, he stepped on something and bruised his heel, his right heel, real bad, to the point that he really couldn't walk. So he spent most of the day in the carriage. Well, after an hour of frantically searching the yard, Mrs. Corbett got some of her neighbors to respond. And they looked, and then soon the men started to come home from the mines. And then neighbors telling neighbors. Soon there was a huge group of people looking for the little boy. Well, late that night, the Stellarton mayor heard about this, and he made contacts with the fire department and other neighbors. And he arranged for special trains to arrive the following morning from Trenton, Lourdes, New Glasgow, Westville, and that vicinity, trying to bring in thousands of people to look for the boy. On top of that, the owners of the mines heard what was happening and closed the mines and told the men to respond to look for the boy. Needless to say, the front yard of the Corbett's home was a mass of humanity. And there were groups of people from the fire department that were in charge of the search. And what they did is they made a line of searchers a mile long, arm's length apart, and they started to go through the bush looking for the boy. This was a good strategy. The first day, as they're doing that, in one part of the yard near the Corbett home, they come across an interesting scene. They see what they think is a small stomach and intestines that are highly decomposed laying on the ground. Well, they bring over some medical people, they look at it, they're not sure. So they put it in a jar with alcohol and they send it to Halifax for analysis. They then searched that area where this was found and they found nothing else. The key was it was highly decomposed. Well, that first day it rained heavily. Second day it rained. Third day it rained heavily. Fourth day it rained. And the searchers stayed on. The mines stayed closed. The husbands stayed in the field. And the women continued to search as well. Now let's review animal predation for a second. Say a little child is attacked by a mountain lion or a bear. That bear is going to be indiscriminate about how it treats that body. It's going to tear away the clothes with its claws or its mouth. It's going to go right for the abdomen. It's going to not care about what's around. There's going to be scraps of clothing. There's going to be drag marks. There's going to be blood. It's going to be a wild scene. They didn't find any of that. They didn't find any clothing, any shoes, any blood, nothing. Nothing other than what I just told you. And it was highly decomposed. 4 days later, they're still searching. Halifax comes back and says, it's inconclusive. They're not sure if it's human or animal, but it was highly decomposed. Meaning it was probably older than a day or two old, which would have had to have been had it been the son of the Muellers. So I think generally it was considered not the boy. Well, the city of Stellarton posted a $100 reward the second day of the search in an effort to keep people searching. They had 3,000 people for 5 days looking for the Mueller boy. I gotta say that might be a record in Dave's world for the number of people searching pre-1950. That's huge. Now let's review some relative facts. The boy had a bruised foot. The mother said he could barely walk to begin with because he was only 23 months. And with the foot, he could barely walk at all. Very sore. It had been raining. And they're berry pickers. And they found no tracks. What happened? I really don't know. Finding that chair close to the door makes you think, possibly, that the boy pushed the chair, unlatched the door, and opened it. That's a pretty big task for a little 23-month-old boy. Because as you push the chair next to the door to unlatch it, you're not going to be able to open it because the chair is there. So I think in just minor's terms of a 23-month-old, just the act of doing that, it's confusing to me that it worked. Just saying. On top of that, because he had a sore foot, I don't know. I don't know what happened to that boy, but it fits the profile. And it's another case where the father isn't around. I've talked about this before. So, case number 1. Case number 2 involved a little boy named Albert Jones. Now, Albert was just 22 months old and went missing April 26, 1919 at about 2 p.m. His residence was 2327 Dufferin Street in Regina, Saskatchewan. I'll show you what that is. Now, back in that time frame, this was extremely rural. It's still pretty rural today. Southern Regina, lots of water in this area, tons and tons of water. The home was immediately adjacent to the RCMP barracks, and it was 1 block east of the city limits of Regina. Now, Albert was the youngest of 5 kids. Now, very unusual, on April 26th, the day he disappeared, the family had just moved into a new home. That home. And the home had been vacant for several years before. They moved in the morning. In the afternoon, they were getting unpacked. And at about 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the mom realized she hadn't seen Albert. Mom, Dad, and the kids stop everything and they start searching for the boy. Now, Albert was wearing a blue sweater, cream-colored shirt, gray wool socks, and black shoes. It wasn't long before the family made the decision to go over and knock on the RCMP barracks and ask for help. And oh, they got it. The RCMP responded en masse. And they did a cursory search, and they quickly realized that this was going to be a big event. And they sent one of their men to get help from the Regina Police Department. Now, near the end of that first day, the press was already involved, and they were there. And the police made a statement that there were no homes, this is the statement in quotes, there are no homes in close proximity to the residence. The closest home was about 1/3 of a mile away. And they said that the area is practically a wild prairie. This was 1919, so. And there were a few other vacant homes in the area. They were all searched. He wasn't found. There was also a creek pretty close to the home. So the RCMP sent 3 officers over with big grappling hooks. And they got there, and what they found was a creek that was about that deep. And there were 3 or 4 deep holes. So they went through and they very methodically searched the holes, searched everywhere around the creek, and were fairly certain in their mind that Albert was nowhere around there. So they wiped that out at the end of the first day. So April 27th, RCMP had made a call for more people through the press, and they got 200 to respond. The RCMP stated it was a highly orchestrated search. Mother was interviewed and said, "I can't believe my little boy, who could barely walk, got outside of the area of the home." Well, on the 27th, the search encompassed 6 square miles that the RCMP stated was covered intensely. They stated that there were no tracks, no sounds, and no leads. That's troublesome. Because if you're on the search and you can't find a little 22-month-old boy that close to their home, I'd be scratching my head. They made another call for all neighbors, off-duty firemen, and police to respond. The police statement at the end of the 27th said, "Every area we were in was minutely examined by the police." It's a pretty strong statement. That's saying that there's nothing there. April 28th, another 200 searchers show up on scene. Again, orchestrated this time by Regina police. What they did is they got a line of searchers, and 200 of them put their arms out, arms distance apart, and they took a point on the residence and they made a straight line. And what they were going to do is they were going to walk a straight line through the prairie. And they did for 3 miles. They stopped. Then they brought the line around and they searched 3 miles. Then they swung the line around lengthwise and they went back another 3 miles this way. And what the police had done that day is they had made a call to the local Boy Scouts. And they had 200 Boy Scouts to add to the normal searchers that were showing up. And the police said that they were highly trained, very rigorous, listened well, and would be good searchers. It turned out to be true. Also, the beginning of that day, the Regina City Council put up a reward of $1,000 if they could find Albert. Well, that was a big, big reward. They wanted to keep people out in the field. So, on the third swing of all these searchers, there was a Boy Scout who heard something just ahead, like ruffling, and thought it was an animal. And he stepped slightly out of line, and then he yelled out, "Detective, detective." Well, 20 feet away, there was a detective from Regina that was kind of monitoring his portion of the line. And he runs over, and he sees Albert sitting up in the field, just sitting there stoically. The boy was conscious, made no sounds, wasn't crying. Slightly bleeding from the mouth, and he had a slight sunburn. The detective took off his coat, wrapped it around Albert, picked him up, and walked 3.5 miles back to the Jones home and handed Albert to the mother. Albert didn't say anything. He just reached out, grabbed his mom, and put a death grip on the mom, they said. The commanders at the scene had already summoned a physician, and within an hour he was at the house. He stated that Albert had a high temperature, but was otherwise fine. Dr. Consul said that the boy had to have been very strong to survive that ordeal of 50 plus hours in those conditions. Temperatures had been down to 24 degrees at night. But one thing that you learn when you watch these things is what the doctor didn't say. He didn't say that the boy was dehydrated. Why not? Realistically, a 22-month-old boy without water for 50 plus hours could very well die. Could be on the verge of death. That wasn't said. The detective stated that there was no foul play. They never addressed the blood coming from the mouth. The following day, the Regina newspapers had a lot of articles about how good the Boy Scouts did, absolutely. And this decision was made to give the $1,000 reward to the scout troop that the boy was in. Excellent move. Now, for me, a couple of key points. What was Albert doing for 50 plus hours? Because within 4 hours after he disappeared, they had searchers in that field looking. So let's say Albert disappears here, and right here is 1 mile from his house. Well, they had searchers from the house out to 2 and 3 miles that first day. Well, Albert could barely walk. So let's say he made it 1 mile from the house the first day. How did he make it to 3.5 miles with searchers in all of this area continuously for 50 hours? How did he make it that distance without others seeing him? You get it? Right. Now, search and rescue guidelines say that a 2-year-old or younger will be found 95% of the time in 2 miles or less from the point they were last seen. Well, Albert's 2.5 miles or 3.5 miles, almost double the distance. And if you think of my example about how in the heck he was able to travel that distance with all the searchers, it doesn't make any sense. Again, I don't want to beat a dead horse, but friends, these are unusual cases, and they're important because there's a pattern here, a distinct pattern. I greatly, greatly appreciate you being here. Thank you. Please go out and do something nice for your community, help somebody who's in need, go volunteer at a soup kitchen. I just heard from a friend of mine that in Washington, a retired National Park Ranger, he went out the other day and he fed some people under an overpass. It's a good deed. It's really a good deed. Thanks for doing that. Those are the kind of deeds that we ought to all be doing this time. So, thank you for being here. By the good grace of God, I hope I'll see you soon. Paulides out.